Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I mentioned the Institute for Justice earlier this week, and I believe I did a video on this story a while back. But the Institute for Justice got involved in this story, and they just had a big win. So this is something we should talk about here. From ij.org, that's the Institute for Justice's website. Wilmington residents win first round of lawsuit, challenging the city's unconstitutional impound racket. Impound racket, that's what the IJ calls it, and I agree with this one. Wilmington pays private towing companies by letting them keep and scrap the cars they tow, which seems like some kind of, conflict of interest. Andrew Weimer wrote this for the Institute. A lawsuit against Wilmington, Delaware's abusive towing scheme will move forward after a federal district court ruled against the city's attempt to dismiss the case. So the lawsuit was filed, and the city has come into court and said, Your Honor, this case needs to be dismissed. It's faulty for whatever reason. Dismiss it. Court said, no, we're going to proceed. In September of 2021, two victims of this tow and impound racket, represented by the Institute for Justice, filed a lawsuit seeking to bring an end to this impound system, which they call unconstitutional. Unconstitutional. This is a great decision, and we can't wait to get the city and the towing companies under oath at deposition, because if the lawsuit proceeds, discovery proceeds. And during discovery, a party can require the other side to come in and testify under oath, produce documents, respond to subpoenas, do all kinds of stuff. And that's where you get all the great information that you'll use as evidence at your trial. So, IJ attorney Will Aaronen said, Wilmington empowered these companies to keep and scrap thousands of cars in exchange for running the city's impound program. That's unconstitutional. Today's victory brings us one huge step closer to shutting the system down for good. Don't forget that the Constitution talks about the three things: life, liberty, and property. A lot of people go life, liberty, and happiness. That's a different document. The Constitution says life, liberty, and property. And it's talking about whether you can be deprived of those things without due process. So you can't be deprived of life without due process. You can't be deprived of your liberty, locked up, without due process. You can't be deprived of your property without due process. Now, once in a while the courts, and this is something I learned in law school and I'm not too crazy about, but it's true. Once in a while the courts hold the states and other entities to a lower standard when it comes to due process and property versus due process, say, in your life, okay? So if you're about to get executed and you want to expedite your appeal, quite often they'll do that if you're going to get executed tomorrow. If you're going to lose your property tomorrow, they won't expedite that, no. So the real question is what rights and what will they do for somebody with respect to due process and property in a situation like this? So Wilmington contracts out its municipal impound system to private towing companies and funds the entire system by letting these companies wrongfully take and keep people's cars. So instead of saying, we're going to bring you guys in, have you tow cars, and we'll pay you per job, they say, oh no, we're just going to point at cars that you guys can tow, and you can pay yourselves by keeping the cars. So what's weird about that is they are actually making a different amount of money per tow based on the car, not based on what they're doing. So that right there should indicate that something's wrong here. But they wrongfully let the companies take and keep the cars. The city pays these companies nothing for their services. So I'm sure they pitch it to the taxpayers by going, look, we're not running up any bills here that got to get paid out of tax money. This program pays for itself at somebody's expense. So there's no such thing as a free lunch. The price of Wilmington's cost-free impound services falls squarely on vehicle owners in Wilmington who are at risk of losing their cars to an impound system that profits off scrapping cars they tow. U.S. District Judge determined that Wilmington can't have it both ways. Either the victims have an argument that taking the whole value of the car for simply parking tickets is an excessive fine, or the owners have a claim that the city is taking property from them without compensation since their tickets don't rise to the value of the cars. And that's what these tows are all about. So if you have some unpaid tickets in Wilmington and they find your car on the street, they call in the towing company and go, you can snag that car and keep it to pay for the towing. And yet the cars are quite often worth more than the outstanding towing bill. So there's a weird disproportionality there that has to be looked at by the court. While the city recently announced reforms to make the towing program less abusive, these fundamental problems remain. So there's an example that they give here of one of the plaintiffs. And the city ticketed her legally parked car 6 times in 9 days. So they ticketed the car 6 times in 9 days while it was legally parked. While her appeal of those tickets was pending, the city towed her car and demanded payment in full. When she could not afford to pay the more than $300 in tickets within 30 days, the towing company scrapped her car. And so that's for a $300 amount. $300 they scrapped her car. Now, her lost car was worth over $4,000. So the city now demands payment and has actually increased what they say she owes with added penalties of $580. So interestingly here, they're not saying that the car is being taken and scrapped to pay off the tickets. They're saying the car is being taken and scrapped because it was illegally parked. But you still owe the fines for those tickets, even though the value of your car could dwarf all of that, the cost of the towing and the cost of the tickets. It's an absurd program. People rely on their cars to get to work, to see their families, and for other critical tasks. For many people, it's the single most important thing they own, says the senior attorney Rob Johnson from the Institute for Justice. Today's decision is an important step towards our ultimate goal, which is to stop Wilmington from taking people's cars just because they owe a few $100s in parking tickets. And what most cities do, and I know this because I've studied it, and also I used to drive a tow truck. And when I drove a tow truck for the city of Birmingham back in the late 70s, early 80s, and I know some things have changed, but not everything. Primarily it's the cost. Inflation has changed. We would sometimes get a call. They'd say, hey, we need a tow truck over here. And they'd give us a location. I'd go over to the location, and there'd often be a police officer standing next to a car that needs to be towed. Now, quite often you could tell why you needed to tow it. It's been bent up in an accident. They go, yes, a wrecked car, take it someplace. I go talk to the owner, where do you want me to take it? And I'd take it and we'd bill them. But there were occasions where I'd show up and there's a cop standing next to a car in a really weird place. And I remember a parking deck where somebody had, I believe, parked a car that had a manual transmission and it either slipped out of gear or the e-brake failed or something. And the car had just kind of rolled out of place and was in the middle of the aisle. It hadn't rolled far, but the parking deck had a little bend in it like this, and so it rolled down onto the flat spot and stopped. But the car was all locked up and was just sitting there. And there was an empty space right here and the wheels were cocked. So I'm 99.9% certain it came from that space and just rolled out. Now, how that happened with the person parking the car and locking it up and walking away and not knowing it, I don't know. Some people are oblivious. So I show up, there's a cop standing there and there's a car there. And he goes, I need you to tow the car. And I go, to where? And he goes, to our impound lot. The city had an impound lot. I go, okay. I go, what's it doing here? And he goes, I don't know. Do you know? And I said, no. He goes, somebody just called and said there's a car blocking the lane of the parking deck. I said, oh, okay. And I remember I had a little bit of an issue because I had to Slim Jim one of the doors to get into the car and put it in park and straighten the wheels and stuff. And no locking steering column. And actually towed the car to the impound yard for the city of Birmingham. And now what they would do in a situation like that is they would make a note of the license plate, and they'd make a note that they impounded a car that day. And the city was not so large they towed cars every day. They probably towed a car for being parked wrong maybe a couple times a month, but not that often. And so what would happen is somebody's going to call the police and go, my car was stolen. They're going to go describe your car. And they're going to describe it and they go, oh, was it in the parking deck over there? And yeah, it was. Why? Your car was impounded. Oh my gosh, why? What happened? And of course, they're going to freak out thinking that there's something wrongful about this. And they're going to say, oh, well, your car was in the middle of the lane of the parking deck, blocking other cars. And they're going to go, that's not possible. I parked it. Well, your car's a manual transmission, right? Maybe apparently it something happened, it rolled out, but it was there. And I mean, I saw it. The police officer saw it. It was there. There's no question it was blocking the lane. So that person would have gotten their car back by paying the impound fees. And that's it. So when we did the tow, We would generate a bill. The police officer would sign it to indicate that, yeah, this bill is real, and he'd sign it and put his badge number there. And we would later submit that bill to the city of Birmingham. I believe they tacked on a little something for themselves. I'm pretty sure they did. But even so, you paid the bill, paid the impound fee, you got your car back. They didn't crush the car and sell it for scrap to pay the impound fee. And so that right there is just insanity. Because I'm sure you know that the cars on the road today, the fleet of cars on the road today, there are cars out there that are barely running, but they can still move about under their own power, that are worth very little more than scrap value. If you took it to a used car lot, the guy'd say, get it off my lot. You're scaring my customers. So you take it to a junkyard, go, what do you give me for it? They give you a couple $100 in scrap value, depends on price of scrap and so on. And of course, there's cars on the road that are worth millions of dollars. Now, someone's not going to be parking their McLaren in Wilmington and letting it rack up tickets. I don't think that's going to happen. But my point simply is this, that there's a whole spectrum of values of cars. And to suggest that a car that's had a couple parking tickets racked up on it deserves a death penalty seems a little extreme. And I know what happened is somebody came up with the idea and said, well, we're going to have to come up with money to pay these towing companies. Because in the example I gave you, we sent the bill to the city of Birmingham and they paid us. But they passed the costs along to the person who had the car and they couldn't get their car back till they got their money. So it's not that Wilmington's necessarily even saving money by doing this. What they're doing is they're eliminating a bunch of paperwork and administrative costs. But even that's not an excuse for doing this. Because remember, like I said back at the beginning, due process, you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property. And your car is a piece of property. So what's due process? Well, due process generally is a notice of what you've been accused of and an opportunity to be heard. So what's the notice and opportunity to be heard here where they simply take your car out and scrap it? No hearing? No. Were you notified in advance? Here's what you can do to stop the scrap? It sounds like some people may have been notified, but it does sound like it's a process in need of reform, if not just outright dismantlement. They should dismantle the program. Institute for Justice is on this one, doing good work as they always do. I highly urge you to support them and to visit their website, ij.org. Jason and Larry both sent it. Thanks a lot. Wilmington residents win first round of lawsuit challenging city's unconstitutional impound racket. Andrew Weimer wrote that for the Institute. Questions or comments? Put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. I wish life had an undo function.